Hi guys, when taking a photo, you may have a dominance as to what you're initially concentrating on, be it your composition, your exposure for your current lighting conditions, the kind of look you want to achieve, your shutter speed for a given focal length, so to either create motion or to freeze motion, and then maybe where to focus. Maybe focus is last. Why? Because, well, that's the easy part, right? Where do I actually focus? But in the final few seconds before the shutter is actually pressed, many photographers struggle with where to actually focus, especially when there's no standout subject that you want or need to isolate. And this is sometimes the case in landscape or street photography, so having one extra tool at your disposal can be useful. And this is where using the hyperfocal distance can be of assistance. Now, when you were learning about aperture and depth of field, you probably learned that to achieve a narrow depth of field, so just narrow area of focus, so you've got that nice blur or bokeh in the background that you wanted to achieve, so to isolate the subject, that you'd use a large aperture. You'd use f2.8, you'd use f2, f1.4. And conversely, if you want to achieve a large depth of field where a lot of your scene is in focus, that you'd use a smaller aperture. You'd use your f8s, f11s, f16s, f22s, with caution. But now, probably nobody taught you that at any given aperture, you could have many different depths of field available to you depending on where you actually focused. If you were focusing near, mid, or far, and that at a particular point across that focus plane where you're actually focusing your lens, there would be a point that would actually maximize your depth of field from half of the distance from where you've actually, from the point where you're actually focusing, all the way to infinity or near infinity. And this is called the hyperfocal distance, and it differs based on your aperture, on your actual focal length of that particular lens, on your lens, on your particular camera body. So let's have a look into it a little bit. Now, looking at Wikipedia, you're going to actually see the equation to work out hyperfocal distance, where you get the focal length, the aperture, and the circle of confusion limit. And you can actually read about the actual hyperfocal distance theory, the actual physics of it all, which I personally find it pretty fascinating. If you have a look at the f squared over n times c plus f, so plus f, here they're saying the added focal length is insignificant, so you can actually cut out that plus f and just leave it like that. So just say you were at 35 mils, you'd go 35 squared over n, which is going to be your f number, so let's pick f11, so 35 squared over f11 plus times the circle of confusion, which in general terms for 35mm photography or APS-C, you're at about 0.03 or 0.02. So you can have a look at that and work it out. A lot of you though might want to find a hyperfocal distance calculator online, as I've got here. So I'm selecting my format being full frame or 35mm. I'm going to put my lens focal length in of 24mm. I'm going to do my aperture. Let's change my aperture here to f8, for example. So this is telling me that I'm going to focus my length, my lens at 7.9 feet away, for a depth of field from half of that, so 3.95, all the way to infinity. And I can change it again. So let's do that at 35mm at f11, or actually we'll try f16 just for the heck of it. So here, with this combination, I'm going to focus my lens at 8.4 feet away for a depth of field from 4.2 feet, which is half that, all the way to infinity. So yeah, it's not too bad if you want to use that. And obviously can change the format on this particular calculator that I'm using to 6x6 or 4.5 inch. Now, let's have a look at the theory just quickly again. So that hyperfocal distance, so that where we were before, that 4 point whatever feet, so we're going to focus our lens here, and so half of that all the way to infinity is going to be acceptably sharp. So acceptably sharp, you say, oh, that's not good enough, I want razor sharp. Just know that this area here, right in the middle of where you focus, just from there to there, that's going to be razor sharp. But you're not going to be unhappy with the sharpness from here all the way to around infinity. This area before will be unsharp, before half the distance of the hyperfocal length, but you've got to bear that in mind in your calculation. So I've made a few little diagrams here. So I'm just going to deal with 35 mil, so full frame, and obviously you change that with the different calculations. But at 24 mils, you can see these are the distances for these particular apertures. So we're going from here to here, from about 1 meter to 3 meters. 35 mils, so our distances are getting higher, but our relationship on our graph is pretty much the same throughout. At 50 mils, I've marked in red now at 85 mils. Our distances are just blowing out too much. I don't want to have to try to work out where I'm going to focus, like 20 meters away, so nearly 60 feet away. I need to get half of that in focus to infinity. So like look at this, 40 meters away, so 120 feet away. If you times it by 3 to get to feet, around about a bit more than 3 times. But so my area of focus is going to be the closest will be 20 meters away from me, and then to infinity. But 20 meters away is quite a fair distance, so I'd rule out 85 mil as a focal length to use. I'd possibly use hyperfocal distance at 50 mils, but generally I want to use it at 35 mils, 24 mils, 20 mils, and it gets better and better. The lower you go, the wider you go. But notice these distances, they're pretty small, aren't they? Now if you give your mother your camera and tell her to take a landscape shot, she's going to point it out there. The camera will probably focus at the tree near infinity, and you'll take a photo. And the photo will look okay, but basically you're not going to get a lot of that foreground definition at all. It's going to be quite blurry. So look at this. I mean, if you're at 35 mils and you want to shoot at f11, you're only going to be focusing your lens 3.5 meters away. And that's not very far at all. But still, how are you going to do that? Now, on the older lenses, you can see the distances are marked quite clearly. You've even got a hyperfocal scale there. So you've got 16, 16, 11, 11, 8, 8. So, and they're your nearest and furthest away sharp subject, basically. So if you have a look at the right f16 and you focus near, you place that on infinity, then everything on this particular lens from around 8 feet to infinity will be clear. If I'm focusing at about 15 or 16 feet, according to that scale there. Now, what about a modern day lens? Look what happens here. You get feet and meters, but after about 10 feet or probably 15, what's that? About 2.5 or 3. You can't even tell. So what do you do on a modern day lens? The best way is to probably just practice. Use wider lenses, and you might have to measure, or you might have to estimate what's 3 meters away. You might have to just get used to it. You could possibly mark it somehow, but yeah, it's going to be quite tough. So it is going to be much easier on older lenses. But I guess once you've done it, you just keep doing it again, and you just get better and better at it. And just remember, it's a guide. Now, looking at these, coming back to our distance here, it says 3.2 meters. I would err on the side of over focusing or overstepping that. And so if you don't know exactly where 3.2 meters is, or 2.3 meters for f8, for example, I'd go to 2.5 meters or approximately there. I'd try not to go any lower than our subjects in the far distance will probably be quite blurry. So err on the side of overshooting that distance mark rather than under. But just have a go at it. I think it's just another tool. It's just another tool to use. If you don't if you're picking up a new camera and you don't have a calculator, and you're expected to take a sort of a landscape shot, then a general rule of thumb is to aim for about a third of the way up the frame. So focus not halfway, not three quarters, not off to infinity. Focus only about a third of the distance of your total frame. And even this can save you. It's not as good as using hyperfocal distance, but it's definitely something that can assist. And you'll find you'll have much better, especially landscape shots, using this technique. Sometimes you'll find yourself a bit stuck in the current lighting conditions that you're in. As I was here, this scene unfolded in front of me. I wanted to capture it, but I was at the end of a roll of Kodak Tri-X 400 at a speed of 1/25th of a second at f4. So not a great aperture really for a scene like this, but and not a good aperture to really do much with hyperfocal distance, because at f4 you'll find your distances are really probably past this gentleman here, of where the hyperfocal distance calculator will tell you need to focus to get everything out to infinity. So I didn't need infinity. I don't need back there, but I wanted at least from this gentleman's foot to this lady's hat, or lady's hat and face, in fair focus anyway. So what I did was I used that 1/3 into the scene rule, and I estimated the total distance in this scene, and 1/3 into that total distance was probably this gentleman's hat, or yeah, possibly around here, maybe there, or even actually at this man's elbow or his butt. I think I actually ended up focusing on his backside, and that actually gave me this result at f4. So sometimes you're not going to be able to use hyperfocal distance in your scenes, especially when you've got bad lighting or a large aperture. So using that 1/3 into the scene general rule is not a bad idea either. So play with that and see what type of results you get. But instead of the scenario where your mother would pick up the camera and she'd probably just focus in the center, which may be back here, you may not get this man or this man's leg or anything in focus. The middle of the scene is probably the train itself, but before that is probably this gentleman here and this gentleman here as acceptable targets, I believe, for a focus of a scene like this. But guys, this is the end of this. So I've hoped you enjoyed this, and if you have anything to comment, please comment down below, and give me ideas of any other videos you'd like to see, and I'll see you next time.